The night air felt heavy as I stepped out of the restaurant, the echoes of clinking glasses and forced laughter still lingering in my ears. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, but nothing could outshine the clarity I felt within. That dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a revelation. Every word, every glance, every subtle attempt to belittle me had been catalogued, weighed, and understood. Veronica's eyes had once held superiority, a polished mask that commanded obedience. Tonight that mask had cracked, and I saw the fear beneath it, the fragile truth hidden behind jewels and designer fabrics. Her hand had trembled when she touched my card, that simple black card, a mirror of the reality she refused to see. Franklin's attempts at control had collapsed in silence and helplessness, leaving him vulnerable, exposed, like a man who had believed money could shield him from every consequence. And then there was Simone, her head bowed, her hands trembling, the guilt of her silence etched on her face. My heart ached for her, not because she had erred, but because she had been forced into a cage of obedience, taught that resistance was betrayal. I spoke softly, reaching out to her not as a mother-in-law, but as someone who had lived enough to see the chains of control and fear. "You are not to blame," I said, and the weight of years of silence seemed to lift in that moment, like a window thrown open to a breath of fresh air. Tonight, truths had been revealed, and for the first time, I felt the liberation of honesty, raw and unflinching. I walked through the streets with Marcus by my side, the city alive around us, yet silent in its judgment, its noise softened by the quiet I carried in my chest. Every step felt deliberate, each breath a reminder that the night had changed something within me. Marcus glanced at me, his eyes a mixture of confusion, awe, and a touch of fear. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, and I realized that for the first time he was seeing me, not just as his mother, but as a force of nature, a woman who had endured, calculated, and acted with precision when everyone else had underestimated her. "I'm perfectly fine," I replied. My voice carried calm, but beneath it, there was a pulse of triumph, a rhythm that came from surviving battles no one had witnessed, battles waged in silence, in resilience, in the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. We talked in fragments at first, sharing observations, reflections, the sort of candid conversation that only emerges after a storm. I wanted him to understand not just what had happened, but why I had acted the way I did. It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't malice, it wasn't revenge. It was a lesson delivered with the precision of a surgeon, meant to expose the truth and protect him from being shaped by shallow standards. Every word I spoke, I watched him process, the light of comprehension dawning slowly in his eyes. "Even marrying Simone," he said hesitantly, and I felt the weight of that question settle between us. "Even marrying Simone," I confirmed softly. "She is not them. She is learning like you are learning to see what truly matters." The night stretched around us, filled with unspoken understanding, a quiet victory that needed no applause. The taxi moved slowly through the city, the lights reflecting on the wet pavement, painting distorted colors that mirrored the complexity of the night we had just survived. I watched Marcus sitting quietly, his hand occasionally brushing against mine, not for comfort, but as a silent acknowledgement that we had shared something profound. I could feel him processing the weight of truth, the way it settles in your chest and makes you simultaneously lighter and heavier at once. "Mom," he finally whispered, "why did you pretend to be poor? Why not just tell them who you are?" I smiled faintly, a mixture of nostalgia and quiet amusement at his question. "Because, son, sometimes the truth only reveals itself when it is mirrored against lies," I said softly. I needed to see who they truly were, not who they wanted me to see. I needed to confirm that wealth doesn't always come with integrity, and that humility can be more powerful than any account balance. He nodded, understanding slowly dawning in his eyes. The city moved around us, oblivious to the intimate lessons being shared in a small cab at midnight. For once, I let the silence linger, letting him feel the weight and the freedom of what had happened. "And did it hurt?" he asked. I paused, reflecting. "It did," I admitted. "But only for a moment. Because the truth sets you free. And sometimes, son, freedom costs discomfort, confrontation, and courage." Marcus exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He had seen the battle, he had felt the tension, and now he understood. "I think I understand now," he said quietly. "I understand that strength is not about dominance. It's about standing firm in your truth, even when others wish to manipulate it, even when it costs everything they can throw at you." The cab drove past empty streets, the city lights fading behind us, leaving a quiet sense of anticipation, as if the world itself had paused to let us breathe, to let us reflect, to let the lesson sink in. When I stepped out of the taxi, the cool night air felt like a balm, cleansing the tension that had clung to my shoulders all evening. Marcus walked beside me for a few steps before turning back to check on me, a protective instinct that had grown naturally over the years. "Mom, are you really okay?" he asked, his voice low, cautious. I nodded, looking at him with a quiet pride that swelled in my chest. "More than okay, son. I'm free. For the first time in years, I can breathe without weighing every word, every action, every glance against someone else's judgment. I can exist without pretending, without performing, without bending to their expectations." He was silent, absorbing the weight of my words, realizing that freedom often comes at the cost of confrontation, but the cost is always worth it. We parted at my building, and I watched him disappear into the night, strong yet contemplative. Inside, the quiet apartment welcomed me with open arms. The familiar creaks of the floorboards, the scent of old wood and comfort, it was my sanctuary. I brewed tea slowly, savoring the steam rising from the cup, letting each sip remind me that simplicity could feel like luxury when it was genuine. My phone buzzed, messages from Marcus, simple words of gratitude and love. I read them slowly, letting the emotion fill me. Gratitude is rare, I thought, and receiving it from someone you love deeply is like drinking sunlight. I sat by the window, looking out at the city sleeping beneath a blanket of artificial lights. The juxtaposition of all that wealth flaunted and all that quiet contentment I now possessed struck me again. Wealth, true wealth, is not counted in currency. It is measured in peace, integrity, and the capacity to love freely without fear or obligation. Outside, a lone pigeon strutted across the pavement, unbothered by the clamor of life around it. I smiled. Perhaps tomorrow, when the world wakes again, I will meet others like me, people who understand that life's richness is found in honesty and presence, not in the numbers stamped on a ledger. The next morning, I decided to take a walk. Not the rushed kind, not the kind where the city passes by in a blur, but the kind where you can breathe, think, and notice the details, the texture of the pavement, the rhythm of life around you, the little moments that normally escape notice. I wandered aimlessly, letting my mind drift through the events of the past few nights. The confrontation, the revelation, the clarity. It all felt heavy, yet liberating. And then I saw her. A small, elderly woman sitting on a park bench, her bag beside her worn and patched, a collection of memories folded into its fabric. She was tossing pieces of bread to the pigeons, her movements deliberate, gentle, like a quiet ritual. "Good morning," I greeted softly. She looked up, eyes crinkled with kindness. "Good morning, child. Beautiful day, isn't it?" she asked. I nodded, the calm in her voice already seeping into me. "It is. Very beautiful," I said. She gestured to the birds. "Do you see them? Some are big, some are small. Some have feathers bright as the sun, others dull and worn. They share the bread equally. They share the space without judgment. None thinks itself superior. Humans could learn much from them." I smiled, struck by the simplicity and truth of her observation. It's a nice metaphor, I said. She shook her head. Not a metaphor. Truth. We invent hierarchies to feel superior, to measure worth by possessions, titles, appearances. Pigeons don't do that. They just live. Be present. Be real. That's the lesson. Her words resonated in my chest like a bell, echoing the truths I had reinforced in the past nights. Money, appearances, and family expectations are fleeting. Peace, dignity, and authenticity endure. I watched her for a moment, grateful for the encounter, for the gentle reminder that life's real riches aren't in bank accounts, but in hearts, in actions, in how we treat one another. And as she slowly rose and walked away, leaving crumbs for the birds and wisdom for me, I felt a surge of clarity. Everything I had done, everything I had endured, had led me here. To freedom, to authenticity, to understanding the real meaning of wealth. 3 days passed in quiet reflection. The world moved on, but I stayed in the cocoon of my thoughts, replaying the restaurant scene in my mind, analyzing every word, every expression, every silent glance. And then the doorbell rang. I knew immediately who it was. Simone. She stood there, hesitant, vulnerable, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a plain top, no jewelry, no heels, stripped of all artifice. "Mother-in-law," she whispered, almost afraid to speak. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course." She entered slowly, eyes absorbing my modest apartment, the lived-in furniture, the absence of luxury, the walls bare of expensive art, and I saw something shift in her. Recognition, humility, respect. She sat gingerly on the sofa, hands clasped, waiting. I sat across from her, silently giving her space to find the words she hadn't spoken in years. "I don't know where to start," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Start where you feel ready," I replied. Simone drew a deep breath. "I came to apologize, but not just with words. I came to explain." Her voice cracked. "My parents, they are who they are because of where they came from. They grew up poor, hungry, working fields, surviving with nothing. They promised themselves they would never be poor again. And they worked tirelessly to ensure it. Franklin built his empire from scratch, literally from scratch. And when they earned money, they never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. That's why money is everything to them. It means safety. It means survival. It is all they know to measure worth." I nodded. Trauma shapes people in strange ways. "It explains a lot," I said softly. "But it doesn't excuse cruelty." She nodded, tears brimming. "I see that now. And I am ashamed, but I also feel free. Because last night I learned there's another way. A way to live without proving your worth through possessions. A way to see people as people, not wallets." I watched her, feeling the weight of her sincerity. This was more than an apology. It was awakening. Simone looked at me with eyes that were both frightened and hopeful. "Mother-in-law," she said softly, "I want to learn from you. I want to understand how to live with dignity, how to be rich without needing to prove it, how to have peace in chaos, how to be strong without being cruel. Last night I saw something in you I never saw in my parents. I saw class. I saw real power. A woman who doesn't need to shout to be heard." Her words touched me deeply. I could feel the sincerity pouring from her. I smiled tenderly. "Simone, I cannot teach you everything. That comes with living, making mistakes, falling, getting back up. The lessons come from experience. But I can share what I have learned, and I can tell you one thing. The path is not easy. People will judge you. They will criticize you. They will not understand why you choose differently, why you live differently. But if you stay true to yourself, if you act according to your values, peace will come. And that peace is worth more than any fortune." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks, a mix of relief, hope, and determination. "I want to try," she whispered. For Marcus, for me, for the life I want to build without fear or expectation. I want to be better, to live with meaning, to break the cycle. I reached across and took her hands gently. Then start, little by little. Question your habits. Question your motivations. Ask yourself with every choice. Is this for me or for someone else? Does this bring peace, or is it for appearances? She nodded again, absorbing every word. The weight of her parents' expectations, the suffocating legacy of comparison and control, seemed to lift slightly from her shoulders. This was the moment when a young woman glimpsed freedom. When a new generation could break a cycle built over decades of fear and obsession with status. I looked at Simone and I asked, "And your parents? Do you think they will ever change?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't think they will. They believe the world owes them respect, that people should value them because of what they have, not who they are. They can't see that love, respect, and dignity cannot be bought." I nodded. That was the truth. Change is only possible when someone acknowledges a problem, and some people never will. They spend their lives blind to their flaws, blaming the world, blaming others, measuring value in bank accounts and properties, rather than in hearts. "But you," I said softly, "you can change. You can break the cycle. You can choose differently. You can teach by example." She looked at me, eyes wide, drinking in every word. "I will," she said with quiet determination, "with Marcus' help and with your guidance." I shook my head gently, smiling. "You don't need me. Your compass is inside you. The voice you silenced to please your parents. It's alive again. Listen to it. Trust it. Follow it. That voice will guide you through every hard decision, every moment of pressure, every time someone tries to make you doubt yourself." She nodded slowly, the weight of realization settling into her posture. "Thank you, mother-in-law," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "for listening, for being patient, for showing me that strength can be quiet, that power doesn't need to shout." I reached over and hugged her. Not a hug of performance, but a real one, warm, human, honest. Two women, separated by years and experience, connected at the heart. And in that embrace I could feel the promise of change, the hope of a better future. For her. For Marcus. For the next generation. For a life built not on fear, not on control, not on comparison, but on love, empathy, and integrity. Simone pulled back slightly from our embrace and looked at me with renewed determination. "I want to try," she said. "I want to live differently. I want to build a life where money doesn't define me, where respect is earned, not bought, and where love isn't conditional." I nodded, feeling a quiet pride swell in my chest. "You will, little by little," I told her. "Start small. Notice your motivations. Ask yourself before every decision, is this for me, or is it for someone else? Does this bring peace or just appearance?" She scribbled notes in her mind, nodding seriously. I could see the weight of years of misplaced expectations slowly lifting from her shoulders. "And Marcus?" I asked. "He's your partner in this journey," I said. She smiled softly. "He is," she whispered. "He's always been there, silently supporting, learning with me, challenging me when I need it. I see now that love is also a teacher." That statement struck me and I felt my chest tighten. Love is indeed the quietest, most transformative teacher. I told her, "Simone, what you're learning now, the courage to question, the clarity to set boundaries, the strength to love without losing yourself, it's priceless. And it will guide you for the rest of your life." Her eyes filled with tears again, but these were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of awakening, of possibility. "Thank you," she said, voice soft, almost reverent, "for showing me that life can be different, that family can be chosen, boundaries can be respected, and integrity can be maintained." I smiled gently. "You will be the change, Simone. And when you have children, remember this lesson. Teach them to see value in people, not in possessions. Teach them empathy, humility, and strength that doesn't need to assert itself over others. She nodded firmly. I promise. With all my heart. I will teach them what truly matters. And in that moment I realized that the night at the restaurant, the confrontation, the silence, the truth, all of it was not just my liberation. It was also a seed of change planted in Simone's heart. A seed that would grow into a life richer than money could ever measure. Simone left an hour later, walking out with a lighter step, a freer heart, and a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I closed the door slowly, feeling a quiet warmth settle inside me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to perform, to hide, to prove anything. The apartment was still, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun, yet it felt alive with new possibilities. I sank onto the sofa and let my thoughts wander. The weight of expectations, of control, of silent compromises, it was gone. Simone had taken a step toward herself, toward clarity, and in doing so, she reminded me of why I had fought so hard to live my truth. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Marcus. His message was simple, yet it carried the depth of his love and understanding. Mom, Simone told me about her visit. Thank you for welcoming her, for listening, for giving her a chance. I love you more than words can express. I smiled softly. I love you too, son. Always. And in that brief exchange, I felt the circle of our little family close, not with possession or control, but with respect, love, and the wisdom of experience. I brewed another cup of tea, watching the city outside shift with the setting sun. Life continued, its rhythms, its chaos, its beauty. But I felt anchored, grounded, and at peace. Real wealth, I realized, is measured not by material possessions, but by moments like this, moments of honesty, clarity, connection, and understanding. Veronica and Franklin could continue to chase their hollow victories, their endless comparisons and material shows, but their wealth was shallow. My wealth was deep, rooted in love, freedom, and integrity. And for the first time, I understood fully that the richest life is not about what you hold in your hands, but what you carry in your heart. The truth, the peace, the lessons, they are priceless, timeless, and forever yours if you choose them. That evening, I sat by my window long after the sun had disappeared, leaving only the city lights twinkling like distant stars. I thought about Veronica and Franklin, how they could have so much and yet so little in the ways that mattered. Their wealth was loud, showy, and heavy with expectation, but it had no warmth, no freedom, no room for mistakes or growth. I had lived my life quietly, carefully, but I had also lived fully. Each choice I had made, every step I had taken, had been guided by truth, by clarity, and by the love I felt for Marcus and eventually the family I had built with him. And now, after that night, after Simone's visit, after everything, I realized something profound. True freedom isn't just about escaping toxicity or rejecting false values. It's about cultivating your own inner compass so sharply that no external pressure, no judgment, no material measure can shake it. I thought about the pigeons I had seen in the park days earlier, about the woman feeding them, her quiet wisdom, her serene joy. She had shown me what I already knew but had forgotten in the bustle of life. Simplicity, kindness, humility. They are the currencies of a rich soul. I drank my tea slowly, feeling it warm me from the inside out, and I allowed myself a rare smile. I had protected my peace. I had exposed the truth. I had built a bridge for Simone, for Marcus, for myself. And in doing so, I had confirmed that even in a world obsessed with displays of wealth, the quiet power of authenticity, honesty, and love is unshakable. The next morning, I woke to the soft golden light filtering through my curtains. The city was stirring, but inside my apartment, there was still a calm that had nothing to do with the world outside. I made coffee, the aroma filling the small kitchen, and I let myself linger in the quiet. I thought about Marcus and Simone, their courage, their willingness to stand up for themselves and for each other. It made my chest swell with a quiet pride. I remembered how Marcus had followed me from the restaurant that night, how he had processed everything I had revealed with such thoughtfulness, such care. And Simone, stepping into my apartment without pretense, without defense, her eyes searching for understanding, for guidance, for truth. She had come to learn, not to judge, not to argue, not to defend the indefensible. And in that moment I realized something I had always known but often overlooked. Teaching someone isn't about giving lectures or proving your superiority. It's about modeling strength, patience, and compassion. It's about showing that dignity cannot be bought, cannot be stolen, cannot be diluted by wealth or pride. I sat back on my sofa sipping my coffee, watching the steam curl lazily into the air. And I felt a gratitude deeper than any material comfort could give. Because no fortune, no property, no accolade could replace the satisfaction of seeing someone you love grow wiser, kinder, stronger, more authentic. My phone buzzed. Another message from Marcus. Mom, thank you again. Simone left smiling. I can feel the change already. We are learning to protect our peace together. I smiled softly. That was all I needed. The world outside might be chaotic, cruel, or shallow. But here in this small space, surrounded by the simplicity of my home, I was wealthy beyond measure. And that, I thought, is a lesson they will never learn if they never step away from the mirage of material validation. As the morning wore on, I decided to take a walk through the quiet streets. The city was alive but not overwhelming. Children laughed in the distance, street vendors called softly to their customers, and the smell of fresh bread lingered in the air. I walked slowly, not rushing, letting my thoughts drift. The night at the restaurant kept replaying in my mind, but now it carried a new weight, a sense of closure, of truth finally spoken. Veronica and Franklin's arrogance and obsession with wealth were no longer my burden. I had delivered my truth, set boundaries, and I had shown Marcus and Simone a different way. And that, I realized, was priceless. I stopped at a small park and watched a group of pigeons gather around some crumbs on the ground. A small woman, older than I, perhaps in her 80s, was feeding them. I recognized her wisdom from the other day and smiled to myself. There was something humbling about seeing life in its raw simplicity, untouched by greed or pretense. People rushing past, caught in their own worries, failed to notice the small miracles around them. And I understood more than ever that richness wasn't in possessions, wasn't in accolades, wasn't in status. It was in these quiet moments, in the honesty of human connection, in the lessons we absorb from living and observing. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Mom, I can feel the shift already. Simone is starting to see the world differently. We are learning together. My heart swelled. That was all the validation I needed. Money can't teach values, wealth can't buy wisdom, and power cannot create empathy. Only life, experience, and genuine choices can cultivate those things. And now, for the first time in years, I could say that I had done my part. Not just for myself, but for my son, for my daughter-in-law, and for the example I wanted them to carry forward in their lives. I continued walking through the park, the sun warming my face, the breeze gentle against my skin. It felt like the world had slowed down just for me. A rare pause that allowed clarity to settle in. Thoughts of Veronica and Franklin no longer stirred anger, only a quiet understanding of their limitations, their inability to see value beyond material wealth. I realized that their obsession had been born out of fear of scarcity, fear of inadequacy, fear of the life they once endured. But fear, I thought, is not an excuse for cruelty. My steps led me to a small fountain, where the water sparkled in the sunlight, dancing like tiny diamonds. I sat at the edge, listening to the soft trickle, allowing my mind to drift. Life, I understood, is a series of choices. Every decision shapes the person we become, the legacy we leave behind. I had chosen honesty, integrity, and boundaries. I had chosen love, compassion, and authenticity. And those choices had rippled, affecting Marcus, Simone, and even my interactions with her parents. I sipped my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my hands and into my chest. Messages from Marcus continued to arrive. Small updates, reflections, moments of insight. "We had a long conversation today," one read. "Simone is beginning to let go of her fear of disappointing them. She's learning that being true to herself is stronger than any inheritance." My chest tightened. That was the moment when I realized the impact of my actions wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about giving others the space to see their own truth, to reclaim their freedom from the weight of expectation. And in that quiet park, surrounded by the ordinary beauty of life, birds fluttering, children laughing, the distant hum of the city, I finally felt completely, undeniably rich. Not because of money, not because of status, but because of the peace, clarity, and love that filled my life. A few days later, Marcus called. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight of reflection behind it. "Mom, Simone wants to take the first step on her own. She wants to meet with you again without fear, without pretense. She's ready to learn, to understand." I felt a warmth spread through me, a mix of pride, relief, and quiet joy. It wasn't about being praised or recognized. It was about witnessing growth, the emergence of a young woman who could choose a different path from her parents. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it slowly, and there she was, Simone. Eyes clear, vulnerable, yet determined. No jewelry, no makeup, just her, raw and authentic. "Mother-in-law," she said softly, almost a whisper. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course." She entered, her gaze moving slowly around my apartment, noticing every detail. The worn furniture, the simple walls, the small signs of life that made it mine. She sat on the sofa, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor for a moment before finally looking at me. I waited. No pressure. No judgment. Just space. "I don't know how to start," she admitted. I smiled gently. "Start where you feel ready." And she began to speak. Slowly, carefully, she recounted the story of her parents, their childhood, their struggles, their trauma, and how it shaped the people they became. And through it, she revealed her own fears, her doubts, the silent weight she carried trying to reconcile love for them with the hurt they caused. I listened. Every word, every pause, every tremor in her voice. And in that moment I realized something powerful. The walls we build around ourselves, the chains of expectation, can be dismantled not with force, but with patience, understanding, and honesty. I reached out, placing a hand gently over hers. "Simone," I said, "you have already begun the journey by seeing the truth, by recognizing it, by refusing to be defined by the shadows of others. That is the most important lesson of all." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release, of understanding, of hope. Simone looked up at me, her eyes searching for something that words alone couldn't capture. "Mother-in-law," she whispered, "how do you do it? How do you stay so calm, so composed, even when people treat you poorly or try to control you?" I took a deep breath and let the silence stretch for a moment. It wasn't arrogance, nor a shield of indifference. "It's not about never feeling hurt," I explained softly. "It's about knowing what is yours to carry and what is theirs to carry. Pain, anger, judgment, they belong to the person who chooses them. You don't have to take it as your own. You protect your heart first. You protect your peace first." She nodded slowly, absorbing the words, letting them sink in. "And the money? The wealth?" she asked cautiously, almost afraid to tread there. "Money is just a tool," I said. "A tool that can provide comfort or create division. It can empower or enslave. But real power, real richness is in self-respect, in the ability to live with dignity, in the relationships you nurture, in the legacy of kindness you leave behind. Simone's lips trembled. I've never seen it before. People with power who don't feel the need to prove it, who don't crush others to feel superior. I smiled. That's because most people measure their value externally. They confuse possession with worth. But worth is internal, Simone. It is quiet, it is consistent, it doesn't boast, it doesn't compete. It's who you are when no one is watching, what you choose when you don't have to choose. She reached for my hand, a connection forming that was honest, raw, and human. I want that, she said simply. I want to be rich like that, not in money but in strength, in integrity, in love. And in that moment I realized something extraordinary. The lesson I had carried through decades of experiences, of struggles, of silent observations, was now passing into another generation. Through her the cycle could change. Through her humility could become strength. Empathy could outshine arrogance. Authenticity could triumph over pretense. And I felt a quiet, deep joy, the kind that has nothing to do with applause, recognition, or validation, but everything to do with seeing a heart awaken. The next morning, the sunlight spilled through my window, painting the walls with a gentle warmth that felt like a quiet reassurance. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the steam curl around me, savoring the stillness before the day began in earnest. Even the city outside seemed softer today, less hurried, less critical. I realized that last night's confrontation, the emotional storm I had weathered, had not only revealed truths about others, it had revealed truths about myself. I had allowed myself to be patient, to act with intention rather than reaction, and in doing so, I felt a power I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about money, status, or revenge. It was about clarity, about knowing who I was, what I valued, and what I would no longer tolerate. Marcus called mid-morning, his voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Mom," he said, "Simone and I talked again. We went over every moment, every word. I told her that boundaries aren't walls, they're respect. And she listened." I could hear the weight lifting from him, the boy I had raised now stepping more fully into the man he was becoming. "It's strange," he continued, "but I finally understand. It's not about defying my parents. It's about choosing ourselves, our life, our happiness." I smiled quietly, a warmth spreading through my chest. I told him that he was learning a lesson most people never do. That courage and integrity matter more than wealth, and that sometimes walking away from what's easy or expected is the hardest, most important act of love you can show. The city moved on outside my window, indifferent to our small triumphs. Yet in this apartment, in this quiet moment, I felt the world align. I realized that last night, by standing my ground, I had not only protected myself but had given Marcus and Simone a new perspective, a chance to see the truth of life beyond pretense. And I knew deep in my heart that this would ripple forward, not with loud declarations, but with subtle, unshakable changes in how they would live and love. By midday, I decided to take a slow walk through the park, just as I had done 3 days ago. The sun was higher now, casting golden light on the paths and trees, and the city hummed softly around me. Each step felt intentional, unhurried, a contrast to the relentless pace of my life before. I watched parents holding hands with children, friends laughing together, strangers sharing smiles. And I thought of Veronica and Franklin with all their wealth, yet unable to truly see or appreciate these simple moments of life. They were rich in possessions but poor in presence, blind to the small joys that cost nothing but give everything. I passed the bench where the older woman had fed the pigeons, and I remembered her words vividly. The way she had observed, the way she had shared wisdom without preaching, without judgment. She had shown me that dignity, kindness, and humility are treasures beyond measure. It struck me that my own actions that night, though confrontational, had been rooted in the same principles. I had not sought to humiliate for pleasure. I had sought to reveal, to protect, to live truthfully. And in doing so, I had uncovered a freedom I hadn't realized I'd been missing. A young couple walked past, the woman carrying a small child, and I felt a pang of understanding. Life is fleeting, moments are transient, but the way we touch people, the truths we share, the boundaries we set, they endure. Marcus would remember. Simone would remember. And perhaps one day the echoes of this night, this confrontation, and the quiet aftermath would shape their choices, their lives, and the people they became. The city moved on as it always does, but inside me I felt a stillness, a resonance, a certainty that I had acted as I was meant to, that I had spoken my truth, protected my peace, and nurtured the seeds of growth in those I loved. As I wandered further into the park, I found a quiet corner near a small fountain. The gentle sound of water splashing against the stone mirrored the rhythm of my thoughts. Steady, calming, reflective. I realized that this peace, this clarity, was something I hadn't felt in years. Not because life had been unkind, but because I had spent so long bending myself to expectations, performing a role that wasn't truly mine. That night at the restaurant had been a rupture, a release, and now the air I breathed felt lighter, almost sacred. I sat on a bench, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, and thought about Marcus. He had grown so much in these few days, his courage, his clarity, his willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It reminded me that love and guidance, when paired with patience and honesty, can shape hearts in profound ways. And Simone, too, her vulnerability, her openness, her willingness to learn from someone she had once seen as distant and untouchable. It made me hopeful. She had glimpsed a life where integrity mattered more than appearances, where values were richer than possessions. The older woman's words returned to me, clear and piercing. It doesn't matter how much you have or don't have. What matters is how you treat others, because that is what remains. I realized now that this was the real wealth I had nurtured quietly through years of living, of guiding, of observing. Not in my bank account, not in the accolades or the contracts I had signed, but in these connections, these moments of truth, these opportunities to see others awaken to their own potential. I smiled softly. Life was teaching, always teaching, and I had learned to pay attention. I stayed on that bench longer than I expected, watching people pass by, each caught in their own worlds, some rushing, some laughing, some lost in thought. I realized how easy it is for life to become a blur of obligations, appearances, and competition, and how rare it is to pause and witness the beauty of simplicity. The pigeons from the other day came to mind, pecking at crumbs without judgment, without hierarchy, without pretense. That image made me smile. Humanity could learn so much from them, if only we dared to observe. My phone vibrated gently. A message from Marcus. "Mom, thank you for everything. Simone and I are processing, but we feel stronger already. Your wisdom is changing us, even without realizing it." I read it twice, feeling warmth spread through me. This was the real reward. Not money, not recognition, not applause, but the quiet impact of my choices on the people I loved. The life I had built wasn't flashy, and it never needed to be. It was honest, grounded, and profoundly rich in ways no bank account could measure. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I thought about all that had transpired in the past few days. The restaurant, the confrontation, the revelations, the tears, the apologies, the boundaries. It had all been part of a greater lesson. Not just for them, but for me. For decades, I had navigated the world with careful discretion, weighing every action, every word, protecting my peace, observing humanity in all its flaws. And now I realized that patient, deliberate life had prepared me for this moment. The moment of clarity, freedom, and self-recognition. The evening air grew cooler, and I walked slowly back toward my apartment, savoring the quiet rhythm of my own steps. Each sound, each breath, felt amplified after the chaos and tension of the past nights. I reflected on Simone's words, her vulnerability, and her willingness to confront the mistakes of her upbringing. There was beauty in that honesty, a purity that came from recognizing one's own faults and choosing a better path. How many people never reach that realization? How many carry the weight of inherited pride and fear without ever knowing another way? I paused at a street corner, watching a mother chase after her child, laughing as he stumbled over a crack in the pavement. For a fleeting moment I envied their simplicity, the freedom to be imperfect, to make mistakes openly without shame or judgment. And then I smiled, realizing I had found that too in my own way. Not by running, not by avoiding, not by conforming, but by standing still, observing, and embracing the truth of who I was. The freedom that came from authenticity was a wealth no material possession could ever buy. When I finally returned to my apartment, the familiar smell of aged wood and worn fabric greeted me like an old friend. I sank into my sofa, feeling the weight of the day dissolve. My phone buzzed again. A message from Simone. "Mother-in-law, thank you again. I feel lighter, freer. I want to build something different for myself and Marcus. Something that honors respect, love, and truth. I promise I will try." I smiled softly, holding my mug of tea a little tighter. The warmth of that cup matched the warmth in my heart. I realized in that moment that life's true victories were rarely grandiose. They were subtle, quiet, and often invisible to anyone but yourself. The way someone chose honesty over pride, compassion over judgment, patience over anger. The way a person chose to break cycles instead of perpetuating them. And in that reflection I understood something profound. The measure of a person's life isn't how much they accumulate, how loudly they speak, or how much they impress others. It's how they live, how they love, how they inspire those around them to be better, to see clearly, to act with integrity. Night fell outside my window, painting the city in shadows and golden glows of streetlights. I sat quietly, listening to the distant hum of life continuing beyond my walls, a life filled with mundane routines and hidden struggles. I reflected on how fragile peace could be, how easily it could be shattered by pride, envy, or misunderstanding. Yet, I felt stronger than I had in years, not because I had power over others, but because I had power over myself. I no longer allowed judgment, manipulation, or empty authority to dictate my emotions. I had set my boundaries, spoken my truth, and now the calm that followed was intoxicating. I thought of Veronica and Franklin, trapped in their endless chase for status, wealth, and validation. Their victories were hollow, their smiles forced, their joy borrowed from appearances rather than lived in the soul. And I realized for the first time fully how liberating it was to exist outside of that cycle. To exist with clarity, dignity, and control over your own spirit. That night I didn't just protect myself. I gave a living example to Simone and Marcus, showing them that the real measure of wealth was integrity, courage, and love. The city lights flickered and I closed my eyes, letting that truth wash over me like a quiet river, steady and unending. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the apartment window, warm and soft, a gentle reminder that every day carried new possibilities. I brewed coffee and held the steaming mug in my hands, savoring the simple pleasure of warmth and aroma. I thought of Simone, Marcus, and the lessons unfolding in their lives. Change was not instantaneous, but the seed had been planted. And that seed, nurtured by honesty and example, had the potential to grow into a life of dignity, respect, and authenticity. I reflected on my own journey, the years of patience, of silence, of carefully choosing when to speak and when to act. Each decision, each small act of courage, had led to this moment of quiet triumph. I was not defined by the wealth I held, but by the strength I had cultivated, the wisdom I had earned, and the love I had freely given. And in that stillness I understood the power of living truthfully, without pretense, without fear, without the need for approval. True richness, I realized, was a life fully owned, fully felt, and fully lived. And now I could teach others not through lectures or force, but through the simple act of being. By midday, the city was alive with movement. The rush of cars, the chatter of people, the smell of food from street vendors. I walked slowly along familiar streets, taking in every detail as if seeing them for the first time. The weight of last night's confrontation no longer pressed on my shoulders. It had lifted, leaving behind clarity and a quiet sense of triumph. I thought of the lessons I had imparted and the ones I had learned myself. Life had a strange way of teaching you what truly mattered, and often the harshest experiences were the most enlightening. Simone's voice echoed in my mind, her vulnerability, her honesty, her yearning to break free from her parents' shadow. I smiled softly. Change always starts quietly within the heart, before it manifests outwardly. I knew it would take time for her parents to understand, to reflect, to perhaps even realize their mistakes, but that was no longer my burden. My responsibility was done. My peace was secured. I could now exist fully in my life, in my choices, in the values I held dear, and in the love I shared with Marcus. And that alone was more valuable than any fortune, any accolade, any hollow praise the world could offer. The afternoon sun bathed the park in golden light, illuminating the faces of children playing, couples laughing, and elders sitting quietly on benches. I paused by a fountain, watching water dance and sparkle in the sun. Life moved with such indifference, and yet, in that indifference, there was beauty, resilience, and continuity. I realized that my experiences, my struggles, and even my triumphs were part of this flow, small ripples in a vast, endless river. I thought of the older woman feeding the pigeons days ago, her wisdom echoing in my mind. She had reminded me of what was essential: humility, empathy, authenticity. And now I carried that reminder within me, a guidepost for every decision, every interaction, every relationship. Simone would learn, Marcus would grow, and I would continue to live in alignment with my principles. True wealth, I reflected, was not in material possession but in emotional freedom, clarity of conscience, and the ability to touch lives meaningfully. The fountain's water shimmered and I smiled to myself, knowing that I was exactly where I needed to be, at peace, fully alive, and rich in every sense that truly mattered. As evening approached, the city lights began to flicker on, casting warm glows along the streets and sidewalks. I wandered aimlessly, letting my thoughts drift. The tension, the judgment, the humiliation from last week had dissolved, leaving a profound sense of calm. For years, I had measured myself against expectations, against judgment, against the invisible scales of approval that others carried. But tonight I realized how hollow that pursuit had been. Real validation comes from self-respect, from knowing that your actions align with your values, from standing in truth even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is lonely. And I had done exactly that. I thought about Simone, about Marcus, and about the generations that would follow. How easy it could be to fall into cycles of superficial judgment, of valuing wealth over character, of mistaking appearance for substance. But I also saw hope. I saw possibility. I had shown by example that dignity and courage were far more powerful than money or status, that love and authenticity could guide decisions in ways that created real, lasting connection. My heart swelled with quiet satisfaction, knowing that these lessons, this quiet rebellion against superficiality, would ripple outward in ways I might never fully witness, but they would ripple nonetheless. The night was deep, cool, and quiet now, the city settling into a slower rhythm. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking at the twinkling lights below, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the trials that had forced me to stand firm, for the clarity that had come from confrontation, for the relationships that had strengthened because honesty was chosen over convenience. Even Simone's tentative steps toward understanding and growth filled me with hope for a future built on authenticity rather than obligation. I realized then that life's true richness is measured not in wealth, possessions, or appearances, but in freedom. Freedom from fear, from judgment, from the need to impress. Freedom to love openly, to act with integrity, to teach and guide without the interference of pride or ego. And as I breathed in the cool night air, I knew that this was a moment worth savoring, a milestone in a lifelong journey. I whispered quietly to myself, "This is enough. This is everything." And in that moment I felt complete, knowing that the lessons learned, the boundaries set, and the love nurtured would carry me forward, always rich in what truly mattered. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the floor. I made coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, and felt a rare stillness in my heart. The world outside buzzed with urgency, yet here in my quiet apartment time seemed to slow. I reflected on the events of the past week, the confrontation at the restaurant, the lessons given and received, the moments of raw truth and revelation. Each memory carried weight, each emotion left a mark, but none of it was heavy anymore. It was a tapestry of growth, resilience, and liberation. I thought of Marcus, who had matured so quickly in the span of a few short nights. He had witnessed honesty, strength, and courage in action, and I knew that he carried that within him now. Simone, too, stepping into a new awareness of her choices and the values she wanted to uphold. And me? I realized that I had stepped fully into my own power, not the kind that could be measured in money or status, but the kind that comes from knowing oneself, from setting boundaries, from refusing to be diminished by the expectations or cruelty of others. By mid-morning, I decided to go for a walk. The streets were alive with sounds, the chatter of neighbors, the laughter of children, the hum of cars, but there was a rhythm to it that felt comforting rather than chaotic. I watched people interact, noticing the small gestures of kindness. A young man helping an elderly woman cross the street, a child offering a flower to a stranger, a couple holding hands and laughing. These small acts, invisible to many, carried more value than any wealth or material possession could ever convey. As I walked, I thought about Veronica and Franklin and the lesson their behavior had reinforced. Money can buy comfort, security, even admiration, but it cannot buy character. It cannot buy humility, empathy, or respect. These things are cultivated through experience, through reflection, through choices made in alignment with one's values. And as I continued, I felt a deep conviction that life's worth is measured not by what we accumulate, but by how we treat others, how we honor ourselves, and how we live with courage and integrity. As I strolled through the park, I noticed a young couple sitting on a bench, quietly arguing. Their voices were low but tense, full of frustration and hurt. I couldn't help but feel a pang of recognition. How many times had I seen this same pattern in life? Miscommunication, assumptions, pride, and fear can poison even the closest bonds. I slowed my pace, taking a deep breath, and reminded myself of the power of silence, the strength of listening, the necessity of choosing words with care. Sometimes the most profound lessons are taught not by grand gestures, but by quiet, thoughtful actions. I found myself thinking of Simone again, how she had come to me, raw and vulnerable, seeking understanding and guidance. How brave it had been for her to confront not just her parents, but herself, to challenge the patterns she had inherited. And I knew that bravery is contagious. It spreads quietly, leaving ripples of change in its wake. Marcus, too, navigating his own growth, learning to set boundaries with compassion, to honor both love and self-respect. I felt a swell of pride for them, not because of what they had achieved materially, but because of the choices they were making, the integrity they were cultivating. I continued walking, my footsteps echoing softly against the cobblestones. A cool breeze brushed against my face, carrying with it the faint scent of flowers and freshly baked bread from nearby stalls. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a rare moment of gratitude. Gratitude for clarity, for lessons learned, for the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Gratitude for the moments of connection that remind us of what truly matters. Life is fragile, fleeting, and unpredictable, yet it is also filled with opportunities for growth, for love, for authentic joy. And those opportunities often appear disguised as challenges, as confrontations, as nights that test every ounce of patience and resilience we possess. I thought back to the night at the restaurant, to the tension, the revelations, the pain, and ultimately the liberation. That night had been a crucible. It had burned away pretense, exposed the truth, and revealed the strength that had always been within me. I realized that true freedom comes not from what we accumulate or achieve, but from knowing who we are, refusing to be diminished, and living with authenticity. And in that realization I felt a profound sense of peace, a calm certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with clarity, courage, and a heart unburdened by the expectations of others. I returned home that evening, the city lights flickering softly through my window. Sitting in my familiar armchair, I reflected on everything, the confrontations, the revelations, the lessons. It struck me how much power lies in living authentically, in honoring our values, and in refusing to be defined by the opinions or wealth of others. Peace isn't found in what you possess. It's found in who you choose to be, in the integrity with which you navigate life, in the kindness you extend without expectation. I thought about Simone, about Marcus, about the quiet wisdom of the old woman in the park, and I realized that life is a series of choices. Every moment we decide whether to follow fear or courage, pride or humility, pretense or truth. And the truth always sets you free. Not immediately, not always easily, but eventually. The freedom to speak your mind, to set boundaries, to love without compromise, to live fully and deeply. This is wealth that cannot be measured in dollars or possessions. So I want you listening now to take a moment and reflect. Where in your life are you pretending? Where are you silencing your truth for fear of judgment or rejection? Where are you allowing external measures of value to dictate your self-worth? Begin small. Begin today. Speak honestly, act with integrity, love genuinely, and protect your peace. Every choice, every moment of courage, builds a life worth living. And that, my friends, is the richest life of all. Because at the end of the day, it's not the money, the accolades, or the appearances that define us. It's the love we give, the respect we earn, and the truth we live. Live boldly. Live honestly. And never forget, your authenticity is your power.